You're going to get a really fantastic thing tonight, and I hope everyone's brought all the gray matter. My brother John Kipping, who has spent a lifetime acquiring all this paraphernalia and all this knowledge. When he was a youngster, he was super intelligent and hyperactive. It was a really dangerous combination. He's gonna, but I'm very proud of him because he's somehow made it through all that, and he's got the patience to engage in this stuff. If you've ever, people always say, oh well, if you know the civilization crushes down, I'll just go live off the land. Really? It's a full-time job, as you will hear in just a few minutes. Anyway, you're in really good hands with John Kipping.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm pretty active in the El Dorado chapter, and our monthly meetings are actually every other month now. We used to get 20-25 people, so this is a real treat. There's so many of us in here, we may have to open the door for a little bit of
the burglar alarm will go off.
Oh, yeah, maybe that would be good. I've got a presentation on the ethnobotany of California, although we'll travel a little bit into Baja California, maybe a little bit of southeast Alaska, two regions of the West Coast that I spend a lot of time in. I became interested in wild plants, maybe the same as you are, when I worked at the Randall Junior Museum in San Francisco, and Ted and I collaborated on a little display about poison oak cures that were found in Indian folklore. And I have a couple of gory pictures I'll show you. And then I got a job working at the San Francisco Botanical Gardens in charge of education and trying to set up ways of interesting children in plants. And that's kind of tough, but we all reminisce and fantasize about living, you know, the Rousseau existence of living in the wild, and all of us wanted to be raised by Indians, if not wild wolves. And so I started delving into ethnobotany and doing a lot of reading and research, and then I was lucky enough to find a couple of classes that I took over the years on weaving using native plant materials. So I've got a few of my little baskets that I made I'll talk about. But I'd like to delve right into this if I could, and let's see if this works. Okay. One of the wonderful things about California is the great extent of our native plants. It's probably over 5,000 species and other taxa right now. But one of the remarkable things about having our, in general, Mediterranean climate is that California supported over a 10 to 12,000 year period, some of the highest density of human beings in a non-agricultural setting on the planet, and they did it fairly peacefully. Now in California there are 7 language stocks, each of which would be equivalent to like the Romantic language. So, and one of which, the Yuki, is totally unique to California. There's no other people speaking the same type of language. And so this represented at least seven great successful migrations of people coming through California. And you know, it's like, hey, this is a nice place, I can live here. But besides having so many people, and again, the Mediterranean climate, hot, dry summers, precluded a lot of agricultural endeavors that required irrigation. Now there were irrigation farmers in floodplains in some areas in Southern California near the Colorado River, but in general people discovered that they could utilize the incredible wealth of the oaks. We have so many species of oaks here in California, and some of the larger ones like the valley oak on the right and the blue oaks that you know, and the tan oaks relatives and the black oaks, can produce incredibly large crops of food that is can be preserved by drying, and then it's available as a good source of carbohydrates and protein all year round. So they tended the wild gardens of the foothill and the valley oak woodlands and learned how to process the acorns because when they're raw, they are rather bitter. But luckily, the tannins, the bitter principles, are water soluble. So they could gather, several hundred pounds per person and keep it for a year, and then utilize all the other great animal and plant resources. And just an amazing amount of knowledge went into the gathering, the preserving, the preparation of foods. And even, various oaks are more preferable than others. The tan oak, which is unfortunately got sudden oak death and has just seemed to be leaving the planet. Where I live in the Sierra foothills, we have the echinoides variety, the dwarf one. And I don't think the sudden oak death has reached there yet. There are various ways of storing acorns because other things like to eat acorns, including rodents. But this is one made out of willow branches up in the Klamath River area. It's about 4 or 5 feet across. And at Yosemite Valley, Craig Bates, the curator there, helped put together a replica of a Miwok acorn granary. Sometimes these things, the shelled acorns will be kept in baskets inside, but usually there was a communal area where every day they could go out and open up this various storage areas and get the acorns out. And California is peppered with bedrock mortars. Now, to make the acorn meat edible, palatable, it had to be ground up into a powder, and then had to be contained. The meal had to be contained while water washed away the tannic acid, and then the ground up, mashed, cleansed meal was then either baked into a really hard little bread, or more commonly made into a mush called a tole by the Spanish. And so we have the presence of this people for a long time are found in the presence of the bedrock mortars. And here we can see preparing some acorn meal. Now I have here a basket made by some of our northern neighbors around Clear Lake. This is the wonderful Pomo people. And this basket has no bottom, as you may notice. But it was actually, it's called a mortar hopper, and it was one way of keeping the acorn meal from flying out into all directions as it's pounded. So it would be put over the hole and then lifted up, and then they made a special brush for sweeping the meal into another basket for sifting. And these are made out of, how many people know soap plant? Chlorogallon, Pomeridianum, but they probably changed the name. Anyway, I'll talk about how these I'm like 67, and I'm getting really tired of how these new PhDs change all the names all the time. Give me a break. It's hard enough to remember when you're 20, and then, how gray matter goes downhill. Anyway, I've got a couple of other baskets up here that were, one is a Maidu basket, and that's pictured here, and it was used for sifting the acorn meal. After grinding with stone tools, using a mortar and pestle, the meal could be put and spread out in this coil basket, and this is made out of maple sapwood, willow sticks, and redbud. And you push the meal around and then kind of lean it over. Whoops, I forgot it's full of pine seeds. And the coarser material would drop off, and the very finely pulverized acorn meal could then be tapped in and go directly into the cooking process. And then here's another Pomo basket that was used as a sieve, the way we would letting the meal pass through if it was processed enough. I got pine seeds all over the place.
That's okay.
That's all right. These ground squirrels will love it. The technology that was used to process a fairly inedible, bitter tasting raw product into something that supported hundreds of thousands of people was also applied to the fruit of our native horse chestnut, the buckeye. And buckeye contains coumarin, I think? Black poison, coumaric acid. But it's water soluble, so the very large seeds of the buckeye could be processed by mashing washing and then cooking, but it doesn't store well. If you try to dry a buckeye seed, it just shrivels up. It is the largest seed of any native California plant. Now on the east side of the Sierra, a staple food of the people would have been the pine nuts from, there's 4 species of pine nuts here in California, but this is the single needle pinion. It has the only one seed, only one leaf, and the cones take 2 years to mature, and it's a desert mountain pine. And like the acorns, the people, the Paiutes, the Washoe, the high desert peoples of the Great Basin Range learned to depend upon this as a staple of their diets. And they would have ceremonies and celebrations. They would send out scouts to find out where the best pine harvest could be had. And then the pine cones would be roasted, and this takes away the sticky pitch from the cones. And I was lucky enough years ago to get invited to go to somewhere in Carson City back in the 60s to visit an anthropologist. This is Peg Wheat, and this was a lady whose mother was a full-grown person before she saw the first white people come through their territory. And she's Paiute. Her name is Wuzzy George. So she was raised by her grandmother, and luckily acquired all this knowledge that could have been so easily lost. Anyway, she has a winnowing tray, kind of like this one, made out of entirely of willows, split willow bark, and just blew me away. She was toasting pinyon pine seeds that still had their shells on them with hot coals, and she would be tossing it up so the coals stayed really hot, but they didn't stay in contact with the basket long enough to burn a hole in the basket, you know, because something like that takes months to make. And then she would pick out the hot coals. That just blew me away. That's called a winnowing. And then she would use a mano and metate to gently grind, we call it a muller maybe in English, to gently grind off and break off the seed coats. Then it would go back in the winnowing tray, blow away the lighter seed coats, and then come down here, and she would grind these up, and then she used a little of this meal to rub over the toasted seeds, meats that got charcoal on them. And then that would, like it was art gum eraser, remove the black powder. And then that would be mixed in with hot water, or mixed with water, put in a cooking basket, a watertight basket, and then hot stones introduced in it, same with acorn mush, and then stir it like heck, maybe using a loop stick, or this is a made out of black oak, California black oak, Quercus kelloggii, used to stir the stones so they don't burn the hole in the cooking basket that Grandma made. Around here we have various species of pines, foothill, or great pine, bolt pine, collected by David Douglas. And these are the seeds that I just got here. This is one of my little hikes around my neighborhood. I really like these, but these are really hard seed coat. But it's a plant food that can be abundant. But if you climbed gray pines, it's not the. I'm an arborist. I did a lot of climbing over the years, and one of my least favorite activities was getting paid to take down a big bolt pine over somebody's house with tile roof. The cones have a way, even though you rope off the branches, the cones have a way of, and this goes like, oh crap, now I gotta fix 3 tiles. Anyway, besides having an edible, high protein, oily meal in here, the pitch itself is very handy. It was chewed as just like chewing gum or used as a medicine. And then the pulverized charcoal could be mixed with the sap and then heated up and then put over baskets to seal up small openings. So it sort of seed-proof things. So it was used as a waterproofing and seed-proofing. Some of the other native pines with large seeds, the coulter pine, which extends from Diablo, Mount Hamilton range south into Baja California, and then our own beloved sugar pines. But I tried shooting sugar pine cones off with my .22, and I'm just a terrible marksman. But I found that for me, the easiest way to collect these while they still had the seeds in them was to find out when squirrels were going about their business, chewing the greenish cones off. And so then you steal the squirrels. I mean, they're just rodents. Yeah, some of these pictures are from Ted. But the California pepperwood or bay laurel, also it's in the avocado family. If you think of the bay fruit as being like a little avocado, it's a leathery rind and then a mesocarp of oily flesh and then a giant seed inside. And so the seeds were roasted and eaten by native peoples. And then the leaves, they say, could be used for headaches. And I find if you smell the leaves much, it gives me a headache. So I don't know which was worse, the cure or the... but the leaves were used in sweat houses and as a way of repelling fleas. And when I left the Bay Area, pretty much, one of the things, I continued working on trees up in the Sierra foothills. And I really liked that there weren't too many bay trees up there. Because I don't know, have you ever climbed a bay tree or ground up? In tree work, we use these big chipper machines. You know, when you throw bay trees branches through there, everybody starts sneezing and coughing, and your eyes go crazy. So
We don't chip them.
we don't chip them, yeah. Well, they're beautiful plants, and one of the earliest blooming in fairly primitive trees. Most of their relatives are tropical, subtropical. And then one of my favorite source of edible wild plants are the hazelnuts, or wild filberts. And right now, about 3,000 feet near my house, they're blooming. The male flowers are pendulent, and then they have real pretty little female, I guess I didn't put that picture, little red stigma flowers, the female flowers, since they're wind pollinated. But it's pretty tough to find the wild filberts. Usually the jays and the gray squirrels are out there doing their thing and getting them. There's a plethora of berries that are delicious and edible. And one of the places I loved spending time growing up was on Mount Davidson in San Francisco, and the blue huckleberries grow there. It's an evergreen Vaccinium ovadum, and they grow up in the redwoods. And Point Reyes is a great place to go there in the Doug fir forest. And this was a class we did years ago for University Extension at the Mendocino Woodlands, picking red huckleberries and salal berries, and there's just so many kinds of things. One that doesn't taste that good would be our elderberries. Now the red elderberries supposedly give you an upset stomach. And I tried to make elderberry wine out of these, but I got some really good vinegar. And, but jelly, really nice flavorful jellies. And one of the most deliciously edible parts of the elderberry are the flowers. You got to shake off the aphids and leaf hoppers and stuff like that. But
You batter fry them.
yeah, and you dip them in a batter and you kind of fry them like with pancake batter, and they're really good. They're also, the elderberries have these wonderful tall shoots, suckers that come up in a very big pith. And they were hollowed out and made into flutes. They were also hollowed out and used to store dried insects in case you want to have your grasshopper snack. And they were used for shamans' wands. And in Europe, I mean, the fact that it's called elder is significant. They were, the sorcerer's wand was made out of sambucus, out of the elder state. And then I made some gambling sticks. Now that we know about a lot of the California Indians survive on our vices by having us go and gamble there. But gambling has been a part of culture for years and years and years. And they made their dice, and all cultures up and down California used elderberry with the pith pulled out, and they would smooth off the bark and then burn in different markings. And these were the dice, but instead of being six-sided, they're two-sided. So they have a round side and a flat side. And generally, people would take 6 of these things, sing their gambling song, and then throw them down. Sometimes on a big basket made just for the gambling trick. And if they landed all up or all down, you got 2 points and got to throw again. Or if you had half up, half down, 1 point, you took your stick out of the pile of counting sticks and you got to throw it again. Anything else lost, or you didn't score, and your opponent got to gamble. And this could go on all day and night. And it was a big thing, usually in the wintertime and after harvest, that everybody get together and gamble. So Sam Buke is a lot of fun. California grapevine, besides being edible, the leaves were used sometimes for leaching by putting down a hole in a sand basin near the grindstones for acorn meal. Put down the layers of grape leaves and then carefully pour water over the meal. There were many different ways of preparing this, but it had to be done carefully. And then the grapevine was used sometimes for the rim of work baskets. It could be twisted into 3-strand rope. Just a lot of fun. And these are manzanita berries. You can eat the meal. You could eat the seeds ground up into pinole, or they used, and we're going to try this, for those of you who haven't had manzanita, it means little apple. Grind these up and pour water through it, and it comes out tasting like apple cider. It's really quite good. But if we wanted to be traditional, we would take a bunch of flicker, woodpecker tail feathers, bind them together, dip that into the cider, and then suck it. So I don't think we're going to do that today. More berries, thimbleberries, salmon berries, again collected by David Douglas, who was totally enamored with all the plants that he found. You name it. Rose hips are great because they stay on a long time in the autumn and through winter, high in vitamin C and A. And what I think is really cool is down in south in the desert, you go like, wow, how are you going to survive in the desert? People did quite well. It all came from having incredible knowledge of how do you survive, and it was usually a social thing. It took a real organization for everybody to get by. But these prickly pears, they have the stinging little hairs called glaucus, so you have to get those off and roll them around. And prickly pears are still eaten today in Mexico and other parts of the world. But what I like are the pitaya cactus. In the summertime, these things fruit. They split open and really delicious tasting. And there's both the sweet pitaya and the sour pitaya. Here's the sour pitaya, or pitaya agria. Yeah, this one, it turns out that this is down in Baja California, and that might be, that's Scammons Lagoon on one of the little islands out there. I got to go out to this island years ago. We were studying some of the gray whales there, and I found 70 active osprey nests on this little island. They were even nesting on the cacti. It was just mind-blowing. But the Indian people who lived here found that they could make fish poison out of the ground-up stems of the pitaya cactus. Very cool stuff. And then the cardone, it's like a saguaro species. It's related to saguaros in the Gulf of California. These things get huge, and they hold themselves erect by having bundles of woody tissue. It's long, flattened staves.
Endoskeleton.
Yeah, endoskeleton. And the Indians there, the Seri and other people, learned to use these as a fish harpoon spear. Very cool. And the agaves, oh man, there's so many things about agaves. They're century plants. They just put out incredible energy into this meristematic area, the heart of the plant. And depending on the species and the conditions, they'll put up a huge inflorescence. And so this is a very energy-rich source, this becoming flower bud. And the Indians would take that and roast them in a stone-lined, fire-heated pit and let it cook overnight, maybe a couple of days, and then that would be eaten. Also, the flowers are edible. They're full of nectar. And then the seeds were sometimes eaten and used also as children's play. And then the fibers. Monocots can have wonderful fibers. They're all parallel bundles. And I think I had a piece of, started making a little bit of cordage out of real rough stuff out of this. So I think today you can still buy agave fibers. I think it's called maguey. And of course, everybody knows about tequila, right?
Sessile.
Sessile, yeah.
Sessile is a
Sessile,
agave.
yeah. There are hundreds of species of agaves, all New World, but they've been spread over the Mediterranean and Africa. And they're relatives. The yuccas, we have several species in California. This is the chaparral yucca. I like it as a garden plant. If you give it good drainage in full sun, it can reward you with beautiful flowers.
Make a good living fence.
Yeah, yeah. One of my first encounters with a Joshua tree was when I was a teenager. I was camping on a California Academy of Science field trip. For $10 you got to go to the desert for a week. And I remember we were camping and we were cooking under a Joshua tree, and I stood up and impaled myself. It was like... Anyway, same thing, roasting here, fibers for sandals, fibers for cordage to make snares, edible flowers, and if you want to wash, the roots contain saponins, so that means a soapy substance, and so they would, dig up the roots, grind them up, and then mash it with water for a really fine soap. You can do the same thing with ceanothus flowers and the green fruit of ceanothus without having to dig something up. And then the root bark has a red colored dye, and so it shows up in some Southwest basketry patterns, but also Navajo weavers who still use natural dyes can get a red color from the yucca roots. And here we are looking at Mojave yucca, and this is, seeing as they're talking about CNPS turning half 100. This is Wayne Roderick, one of the founders, and Ginny Fleming in the middle.
Another founder.
Yeah, I mean, thank goodness. I was real lucky when I got to work at Striving. I got to hang out and do some field trips with James Roof and my buddy Art Menzies, and my first ex-wife used to work down at with Gerda Eisenberg at Yerba Buena Nursery, and so I spent a lot of time down there. And it's, getting into native plants is such a wonderful way to spend your life. So there's lots of bulbs, and people have learned to use root resources, for surviving for years and years and years. And it's funny that we think of not funny, but ironical, of the Irish potato famine. Here we take this edible tuber from the Andes and bring it up there as cheap food for labor, for semi-enslaved people, the Irish. But when Fremont came across the Great Basin, he saw people digging bulbs up, and he called them digger Indians. And that derogatory term has been applied to a lot of the Indians in Central California. But these people would dig up roots, including I've eaten the roots of your beloved shooting star. They're not too bad. But yeah, I've dug up a lot of different common species of wild bulbs just to try them, and then I felt a little guilty. But blue dicks, poppy was also used as a toothache remedy. The mariposas or butterfly, sago lilies, all these plants have edible corms or bulbs, but you don't want to get busted doing this. Who would want to eat that? Well, it is kind of luscious, Ted. That's the very fragrant moth-pollinated Washington lily.
It's the Martha.
I don't see enough of them.
It's the Martha Washington lily. Named after Martha.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
She spelled better than George.
Anyway, and our beloved annual wildflowers were probably visually appreciated by native peoples in pre-Columbian times for their beauty, but also as a food source. All these annuals, all these wildflowers, maybe not the lupins so much, but a lot of the compositae, the grasses, evening primrose family, all of those have edible seeds, and there was a lot of technology involved in collecting seeds. You have to know what's edible, what it looks like in fruit, and then people would go out, often women and children, they'd have special little baskets, and they'd have a thing called a seed beater, and you knock the edible part into a little basket, and then that's emptied into a larger burden basket, which I was going to bring when I've only have so much room in my truck. So here's another kind of seed beater that I made out of redbud. You know, different ways of collecting the seeds, being efficient, and then make sure they're dry, and then they can be ground up, mixed with water, and cooked again.
Parched.
Parched, yeah.
Pinole.
Pinole, yeah. How about that meadow foam? Beautiful stuff. Edible seeds.
Good oil.
Buttercups, edible seed. Iris used for fibers for string. And they took advantage of some of the spread of the invasive Mediterranean plants that were edible, such as the wild oats, using that for seed. And chia. Chia could be used as a term for any of the salvias, the beautiful sages. This is one that's interesting garden plant, and good for butterflies. But the main chia is Salvia columbrari, and these are little fruits from it. You can buy chia seeds, which from a different species from Mexico, but all good stuff. Wallflowers, evening primrose, and get into some greens. This is epilobium, very tall fireweed. Ted took a nice picture. Where was that shot, Ted?
That's,
Looks like east side.
it's on the east side, yes.
But I don't know whether it's called fireweed because it grows often in burned areas, but in the autumn, the foliage turns gorgeous red. It's if you get it growing in your garden, it's a runner, but it's not that aggressive, I think. It's worth having, but it's one of the first spring greens to come up in high latitudes and high elevations, so very much appreciated. And I spend a lot of my time in southeast Alaska in the summer and the late autumn, and they say winter's about 3 weeks away when the last flower opens up on the top of the fireweed. And sometimes that'll get like 8 feet high. It's very cool to walk through a forest of tall milkweed. This is one that's not one of, it's kind of peppery tasting, but the common monkey flower that's found in streams and seeps, extremely variable in size. Sometimes it's annual, most of the time it's perennial. It's a good garden plant. They have edible foliage. And then the milkweed flowers could be eaten along with the milkweed leaves. If the milkweed leaves are cooked and they're young, they're not too bitter. But I'll show you some of the cordage or string that's made out of milkweed, Asclepias. Also, the milky sap was used in painting, both in body painting and for cave paintings in Southern California, because it becomes a binding agent to hold the pigments together, and then they were painted onto various objects. A lot of different species of milkweeds around, sometimes good garden plants, and if you like, you've been reading about monarch butterflies, we need to have more milkweeds planted as a larval food source that's not anywhere near a Monsanto area. Here's some of the milkweed fibers. This was at maybe the State Indian Museum up at Sutter Fort. Very cool stuff. And that's what you sit around, the people would sit around in the evening in the winter rolling string. And most of the cordage I made is 2-ply cordage, and I do it by twisting, but you have to drop your trowel to roll the fibers, and I'm not going to do that right here and embarrass myself. But it's really fun making string, My grandparents grew up in the Great Depression and would save balls of string and stuff. And if you made it, you could see why. Now, I've got Indian hemp here, Apocynon. It's kind of a reddish-looking, extremely nice fibers, and it's related to vinca. And then nettles. Also, besides being very good edible plants, if you can avoid let them dry so you don't get zapped. I make nettle quiche, which is really fun, instead of spinach. But the fibers were used to make a rough cloth by the Norse people, but also here in America, used all over as a source of fibers for weaving. This was some sandals that were made in the Great Basin out of sagebrush bark. And Ted, how am I doing on time here? That was the scouring rushes and horsetails contain silica instead of cellulose, so they were abrasive. And so they were used by people all over as sandpaper. And some of the baskets in the Northwest have black patterns woven into them, and the material source for that would be fibers from the roots, the rhizomes of these. And this kind of fun stuff. People that lived around marshes took advantage of these floating air-filled stems. Because their roots are down in waterlogged soil, the trees are the stems are very porous, so that gases can diffuse in and out of the tule or bulrushes, and so they're very buoyant. And people throughout the Delta and San Francisco Bay made tule balsas. And here we are up at Point Reyes, hacking away at the marsh, getting bulrush bundles together and twisting cattail leaves to make sort of a rough cordage, and then we'd string them together and go paddling. And you know, they get a little soggy after a while, but they were very large ones made in the Delta. And I think we had a volunteer kid, no life jacket of course, sent him out in the Nolina Lagoon. There weren't a lot of pre-Columbian plastic kayak paddles, but they did very well. And then here's a little tule house we made. I'd sleep in it some nights when it wasn't raining. And then I made a teepee out of redwood bark, and I did sleep in it on a rainstorm, and it worked really well. So the spiders and I had a good evening. And this is very cool. This is Wuzzy George. She's that wonderful old Paiute woman, and she's featured in a book up here called Survival Arts of the Primitive Paiute. I don't know about the primitive part. I think anybody who could survive in one place for 5,000 years or more and not kill each other or destroy the environment shouldn't be considered primitive. But they learned to bring in ducks close to where they could hunt them by making a floating tule duck decoy. And sometimes they even take a mallard and skin it and then put these tule floats in there and then let them float close by. And here you can see, so I learned to make tule duck decoys. And when the birds were nesting in the tules, they could take tules and weave an egg collecting basket. Very clever folks. And I like the Phragmites. This is one of our beautiful native grasses found throughout the Southwest. And in Baja California, the Seri, who were very kind of antisocial group, a lot of 7-foot-tall warriors. They lived mostly around Tiburon Island, Shark Island, and Kino Bay. I've got some of their baskets, but this is a Seri hairbrush, actually, made out of the roots of a desert bunch grass.
They also made beautiful carvings.
Oh yeah, I didn't bring any of those. They make ironwood carvings, and they brought so much money that now a lot of other people in Mexico are mass producing them, which is not good for the desert ironwood. But anyway, they would take bundles of these common reeds and make these, 25-foot beautiful rafts, balsas, a canoe with a double end, and then they would paddle all the way across the Sea of Cortez, which can get really gnarly there weather-wise. And then they would raid the missions. That was pretty funny. Yeah, that's for giving us smallpox. Anyway, the timber trees, the bark of our incense cedar and bark of the ponderosa pine and the coast redwoods were used to make conical huts for maybe a wintertime place. A lot of the dwellings were semi-subterranean, and it must have been awful when the firewood was wet, and and you had to go up and down the smoke hole to get in. But and then juniper berries were put together into necklaces. They're sort of edible, but you gotta really like gin and tonics to eat those. The bark was used as rope, and then there are some beautiful, on the east side of the Sierra Nevada, there's some beautiful old trees still living where you can see that people pulled wood out of it to make bows. Now the very favorite, fantastic wood for a bow comes from the yew tree, and people up on the Klamath River were so skilled in making sinew-backed bows that it was a big trade item, and they'd be found all the way up in British Columbia and down in Southern California. And that's a wonderful thing about trade. If you wanted to be a trader, you had to carry it on your back. So you'd want something really valuable and portable, and that somebody really wanted it and had something equally good in trade. And most of our state highway system follows Indian trade routes. Anyway, that's the taxus. Flannel bush for monodendron. I think that's the emblem of our society, isn't it? Or the name for our journal. Anyway, the wood could be used for bows. Straight shoots were used for arrow shafts, and the inner bark, which is quite strong, was twisted and made into bowstrings. So you could get it all for monodendron. I like this plant, but I don't like touching it very much. They're really kind of nasty little hairs. Another wood product came from, paddles for canoes came from the ash, but it was very well known for its smokability. These branches were hollowed out and then made into a tobacco pipe. It didn't have a crook in it, but so that you had to lay down and smoke straight up. And I guess the wild tobaccos, I never tried smoking it, but it's apparently pretty heavy duty. And then Ted took this beautiful picture. There's many hard wood shrubs and small trees that were used for digging material. If you wanted to dig up roots, you didn't want your stick breaking right away. So they would get choice mountain mahogany, sharpen it, and then treat the tip of the digging stick by heating it in the fire, and that really made it very tough. So mountain mahogany digging sticks. Yeah, and then various plants, the western spice bush, very primitive but lovely flower, calacanthus, arrow shafts from the shoots, and nutmeg, California nutmeg, edible fruit, sorta, and needles were used for pricking the skin to make tattoos, patterns.
That and the juice of poison oak.
Yeah, well, it's all kinds of stuff. Oh, so I stole these, or I bought these from Arizona Highways. I had an issue, and some of my favorite baskets are, of course, the Pomos, and they still make wonderful things. And these are, I never felt like I used to find roadkill quail, and I would save the feathers off them. But these are the top nuts of the acorn woodpecker. And I asked my Mabel McKay, would she teach me how to put the feathers in there? And she'd go, oh no, you have to have a dream. The bird have to give you permission to use it. I was like, okay. I'll just stick to the roadkill. So I did a lot of little weaving, but I never used feathers in there. And this is really beautiful. These would be willow sticks, plucked out, cut down in the winter, collected the next following winter. And then these are the roots of a little tule that grows up around Clear Lake, dyed black with mud or acorn shells, hulls soaked in water and rusty iron later.
They also used poison oak sap for
Yeah,
that too.
poison oak sap. I asked Mabel McKay, I said, did you guys really eat poison oak leaves to become sort of immune to them? And she said, well, we get these anthropologists come up. We just tell them any old thing. She had a real sense of humor. But, and these are, they use, that's Indian hemp thread. And these are Saxodomus. It's a shelf clam around our coast. And then Haliotis, the pendants of the abalone. And then mallard duck, male mallard duck head feathers. And then meadowlark feathers. And these baskets were a really important part of earth renewal ceremonies. And also these baskets were thrown into a fire and burned at the end of a mourning period after somebody died. So a lot of beautiful baskets went up in flames, just as the stone mortars were often broken when a woman died. Her mortar would be broken. So this is a little basket. I used to work at Audubon Canyon Ranch, in a wonderful place. And Annie Rivetta and I would teach these little classes. We'd go out and get willows and cattails and I teach people a little bit about the sedge and willow baskets, but that takes weeks just to learn how to split the stuff. So, but it was a lot of fun. Weaving is in our genes, in our blood, and I meet people all the time who go, "Oh, I used to do pine needle baskets." You know, that's so cool. You know, I mean, way before we would text somebody, we had thousands of years of weaving. Willows. I just said that because I can't text. This a friend of mine took this. I went up to Dry Creek with, and this area is underneath water now to keep Marin County's swimming pools filled. But the Dry Creek Pomo branch had collected sedge rhizomes there for centuries. So they had the Corps of Engineers build them, you know, transplant a lot of the sedge, and they built them a new sandy area, and it's cool, you know, it's good use for tax dollars. But you got to dig down about 2 feet, and then you find one of these scaly rhizomes, and then you dig along, and you dig along, and then you see another one. Ooh, that's better. And then anyway, and then you sit around and split it, and
With your teeth.
Split it with your teeth. So here I'd split all these, and then you peel the bark off, and then let it dry for 2 years at least, so it really shrinks. And then it has to be wetted down. And then I got a couple of sedge. I used to be a commercial river guide for many years. I just retired last year. But so used to work on the Rogue River in the summer, and I got to collect a whole, I just found these the other day, and it said Rogue River, Whiskey Creek, June 1980. So you split them in half, and then you clean them up by...
Running your teeth.
Well, I had an accident with my tree chipper where it squirted a big old piece of wood into my face. And my teeth don't go where they used to, so it's kind of hard to hold them. Anyway.
You want a light on?
You could tune it too. You do sedge rhizomes in G major. So anyway, and then you have to scrape it with a piece of obsidian. I use a little pocket knife. And some of these threads, this is used for coil or sewing baskets. Some of them in the museums are 50 threads per inch. So you get these old women, you know, out there not only digging this, it's hard work. And you don't do it in the summer because that's when the rattlesnakes are there. Anyway, a lot of fun. So that's Carex barbarae. And this was my first 3-rod basket I tried. And this one, I got to about this point, it was going to be big, and then I went, it's been 7 years, I'm going to finish it. I remember I started this one, I was going to San Francisco State College, and I was doing a graduate school thing, and I get so tired and bummed out late at night trying to type my thesis before computers, and you got to get all the impagination, has to match up. So I go, screw it, and I start weaving on my basket. It was more fun, more rewarding. And this is a single rod basket. This could not be watertight. I can explain it. That's a little one I made. And redbud. This actually, this is another habitat that's gone pretty much. It was all limestone rock down in the Stanislaus River. That was the first river I guided on commercially back in the 70s. And they drowned the sucker for the Maloney's Dam. But had a lot of redbud. And redbud, western redbud, Cercis occidentalis, is a good plant for the garden. You know, it's a legume. Kind of slow growing for a legume, but you'll see some, you know, as it gets old enough, it gets a profusion of flowers. And there are some that have a purple fruit, so you get another color hit later in the autumn. Nice pale yellow flowers. These will be cut down or burned by the weavers, and then then we get these long straight shoots, and then you coil them up after splitting, and then that's quite a process. And then soak them and peel them again, split off the sapwood, and then if you collect them in the wintertime, the bark stays on. If you collect them in the spring, the bark peels off, and they would use the white sapwood for weaving. This is a Datsulale basket, a famous Washoe weaver. Mabel Matei said that the other Indians' nickname for her was the Datsulale wasn't her real name, but that meant big butt. So she used the black pattern in here, came from bracken fern rhizomes dyed black, and then the natural red color. And this is willow sapwood with the bark peeled off for white. But the shape and everything, just gorgeous. And things like that would have been used. They would be used for cooking or storing food. Some of the other materials could use around would be the red twig dogwood. This basket right here, the light material in the coil basket comes from our own native big leaf maple, or if you're farther north, it's called the Oregon maple. It's just like the California bay tree or pepperwood. If you go to Oregon, it's called the myrtle wood tree.
Oregon myrtle.
Oregon myrtle grows only in Oregon in the Holy Land. I'll sell you a bowl. Jesus stood underneath it now. Anyway, my first basketry class I got to take from a gal who studied with Hopi weavers used yucca, and I made a little bear claw, yucca, and Southwest bear grass basket. But it's a long way to go to get materials, so I was happy to find that, and that's my little basket I made. Anyway, here's the yucca that's used for that kind of weaving by the Hopi and Papago people. And if they collected the leaves and dried them indoors, they stayed green. If they collected them and then dried them out in the sun, they turned white. And what's one of the nice things about these, they have a real sharp end, and that was used to have its own little needle point. And then the black patterns came from the devil's claw. Devil's claw, this kind of a, is it a cucurbit? I think maybe it is. Oh, Myrtiniaceae. Yeah, it's a different family. But you see these spreading around as weeds up in, I've seen them up in the North Bay. They get stuck on animals' feet, large animals. Anyway, you have to soak these for 3 or 4 days and then split them with a awl, and so you don't get a really long bit of material. You have to splice a lot. Devil's Club. And this is kind of heading towards Death Valley. I saw in these mountains where somebody, a weaver, had come by and harvested the bear grass, or Nolina. How much more time do I get? I'm going to wrap it up. We want to look at some of this stuff too. These are giant chain ferns. Who grows woodwardia? Anybody grow woodwardia here? Yeah, well, my brother, of course. Although in Ted's garden, this would be way out of scale. It's a beautiful plant, and it was used quite a bit, and there's the Sorai pattern. The people in the Klamath River areas who made hats like this and eating baskets got their reddish color, a reddish-brown color, came from the dyed fibers of the stem of the woodwardia fern. And if you pound them, and they're really big, you get out 5 long, flat, straight bundles. And 2 of them are wide, and the others are kind of small. And then you would pulverize red alder bark, mix it with water, and red alder, you know, when you cut it, the wood turns bright orange inside as it oxidizes. Anyway, they would got a permanent reddish dye of the woodwardia stems from the alder bark. Alder is, if you like smoked salmon, a lot of the people use up in the Northwest and British Columbia and everything, Southeast Alaska, they use alder bark, native alder wood for flavoring. There we go, there's some alders flavoring the dried fish. Wonderful plant. That one looks like it's gazing. And also on this little basket, there's some white patterns. And this is overlaying, again, this Klamath River area basket. This is a hoopa people. Would be the dried leaves of the Northwest speargrass. This beautiful member of the lily family. Hard to grow though, but you see it in the Cascades. And I noticed that you have, for your plant sale flyer over there, you have Oregon grape mahonia. The bark of the stems and the roots of the wild grapes yield a beautiful yellow dye or orange dye. And so not only was it used in basketry material, but people who did, you know what quill work is?
Yes.
Indians saved, in the Northwest, would save besides eating porcupines, would save the quills from them, and then they were used to be sewn into parfleches or sometimes buckskin clothing, and they'd often be dyed with this plant's bark. And we're just about, I think we'll just take a break in a sec. I wanted to mention the soap plant. I was sort of demonstrating a little brush that I made out of giant soap root plants. I usually find them where the highway people have eroded the banks doing their road cuts. This is one that's coming up after a fire, sprouting up, and it has these, you can see the fibers that that cover the heart of the bulb. And people use the leaves of these to cushion babies in their baby carriers. They also use the bulb mashed up and put in low flow summer rivers and streams. And they would just put hundreds of bulbs in, and the whole village would get together, and then they would thrash the water with sticks and it would froth up, and it would kill the fish, but they were still edible. So they used it to stupefy the fish and have a, get everything out of there, probably endangered salmon and stuff. So fish poison, and then the fibers were bound together into these brushes used for sweeping up acorn meal and other household goods. And as it wears down, then it was used for scrubbing out the cooking baskets. And the handle is made out of the cooked interior leaf bases, mashed up and cooked with hot water, and then worked in here, and the juice hardens like plastic resin. It's amazing stuff.
You also ate the bulbs.
And yeah,
baking them.
I tried cooking medium, and they were like pretty yucky. You have to be really hungry. Poison oak. Ted mentioned people tattooed themselves using the poison oak juice. Poison oak, when the juice dries, it oxidizes and it turns black, and that's one way you can kind of recognize it in the winter, if you don't know it very well, is that you look for the little twisted side branches that will often been broken and they're black juice. So it was used for tattooing and also some basket dyeing, getting a black color. And when I taught these little classes on ethnobotany for University Extension, people would do projects. And this guy got an A. He was trying yerba santa, this is his control. And I don't remember what this was, but it didn't work very well. I think it might have been soap root juice, which soap root bulb juice was put on poison oak, I think. But
Wyethia too.
yeah, it didn't work very well. I'm pretty lucky. I've only gotten that tiny little bubble or something, and I pull it out of trees and throw it in my chipper. But but that's for a lot of money an hour. I avoid it. I do dig it up, but it's very cool. I like poison oak from a distance. But yerba santa, people swear by it. We had one friend at the Junior Museum who he would come back from his lake ranch vacation home where he's clearing, or he'd just be, his eyes would be all puffy, and we told him about drinking yerba santa tea as a way of, ameliorating the effects of it, and he said he really took to it, and also using it, applying as the cooked leaves and applying the juice to it. If I start to get a bad chest cold or something, I always like to chew on this or make tea from it, and I take a bunch of it dried with me to Alaska, and it also wards off evil spirits. Trust me. Now, here's another sumac. It's not a toxicodendron, but it's got 3 leaves, but the central leaflet is 3-lobed, so it's Rus trilobata. It's called squaw bush or I like basket weed or basket sumac better than squaw bush. And the fruit is really nice. It kind of tastes like lemonade a bit. A lot of the sumacs in Southern California, there's one lemonade bearing. Really good stuff. But that's used in basketry. And the ceanothus, edible, you can use the flowers for soap. Works really well. Get your hands wet and rub it up. The seeds were an edible source of pinole, and leaves chewed for stomach aches. And also, digging sticks. So a very versatile plant. And I think we'll call this, this was in one of Ted's gardens. Is that your front yard? Oh, no.
No, that's not mine.
No, that's not yours. Oh, you know, that might have been Western Hills
Yeah.
Nursery.
They
It's
would
got the grape steak.
They would tolerate it.
Yeah, that's a lot of mimulus up there. But sticky monkey flower, the bush monkey flowers or diplicus, are pretty good to put on blisters. So if you're hiking, go look at the wildflowers and you get a sore toe or a blister, stop at your nearest monkey flower, roll the leaves, get them sticky, put it on right on the sore spot, and put your sock back on and go. And it seems to be kind of astringent too. Saltgrass, they collected the saltgrass is both coastal salt marsh plant, but it's also found in alkaline areas in the lower San Joaquin Valley. And the Indians there would go out in the morning to get salt. They would collect the briny salt crystals off of the plant and shake it onto a basket.
Death Valley too.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing people live. Let's turn off the projector. I'm not going to show you all 5,000 pictures. But
You're no fun.
yeah, I know. Well, I don't want to go too much over the time, but I want to show you a few things up here that are very, very cool. And one of my favorite books, which luckily was reprinted because somebody borrowed my original one, is called Handbook of the Yokuts Indians. And this is by a fellow who grew up in Oildale down in Bakersfield. And he grew up with the survivors of some of the valley peoples who are collectively known as the Yokuts, but they have many of their own names. And he corresponded and visited Alfred Kroeber and Harrington and a lot of the other people of the golden age of anthropology at Berkeley. And he produced this amazing volume in here. And I got to meet him in his late 80s. He moved to Santa Cruz, so I made a point of going down there and spending a day with him. But I just want to read one or two pages to you, and then I'll kind of cover that basket here. It says, one of the most amazing things concerning the Yokuts is their extensive knowledge concerning their environment. This included not only a knowledge of the geography of the country in which they lived and the use to which many things about them could be put, but also a vast fund of cultural information which to many white persons seems useless. The average Indian possessed a remarkable store of information about the varieties and species of plants and flowers with which he was surrounded in different seasons of the year. This writer knows of several educated Americans who have studied for years the wildflowers and plants of California, but who do not possess an amount of information concerning these same plants and flowers equal to that which was once possessed by an intelligent 8-year-old Indian girl. Once the story was told me by Dr. C. Hart Merriam. Merriam was not only an anthropologist at the University of California, but he came up with the Merriam's Life Zone system. He wrote a beautiful volume called Animal Life in the Yosemite. I mean, he was just a Renaissance scholar. He was a noted authority on California Indians, that he obtained the name of a third and unrecorded species of manzanita from a Miwok Indian woman in the Sierra foothills below the Yosemite Valley. Already 2 local species of manzanita had been studied for years, and Dr. Merriam was attempting to find how far into the mountains the lowland manzanita grew. As both species were well known to the Indians, it saved much time to gather this information from them. He came to a little hut near a stream and asked the Indian women who lived there how much further up the stream the lowland manzanita grew and whether the upland variety extended down as far as her house. She hesitated a second, looked him in the eye, and answered, "They all 3 grow here." Merriam was sure he had been misunderstood. While he was trying to explain to the Indian woman what was meant, she spoke 2 words to her 8-year-old daughter, who immediately left and returned in less than 1 minute with 3 branches of manzanita. These the Indian woman took, and by means of the flower and leaf, pointed out to this noted scientist that they were from 3 different species of manzanita. The doctor was dumbfounded. The means used by the Miwok woman to identify the plant species were the same used by him, and plainly she had identified a hitherto unrecorded species. This noted man was kind enough to name this new species Miwokania, after the tribal group Miwok of the Indian women. Anyway, he spent a lot of time with her and found out that her daughter could, at 8 years old, could identify more than 300 plants, birds, and animals, and her mother knew more than 500 and how to use them. I mean, you know, I think if we all grew up in a society where our resource base was right there, we'd all be a little more cognizant.
Anyone want to live off the land?
Yeah. Yeah. You mean it doesn't come out of a styrofoam box?
Isn't it shrink wrap?
Anyway, one of the cool things in this little book was the people kept doves and pigeons as pets, but also working animals. They were used in bird blinds and decoys. So they would keep these birds in these little cages and take them to a spring area and build themselves a blind. And then they would take out the bird that would, you know, its feathers were clipped so it couldn't fly, and they would be tied up so it could, but they would put out, you know, ground up grain, and then they would hide with a long snare back in this little blind, and the other birds would come in, hey, look at Charlie's got some food, it's safe, you know, they pull him in there. So I just made that one out of willow. It's pretty cool stuff. And also by Yokuts people, this is a very cool basket. I'll pass this around, just kind of hold it by it. This is a treasure, kind of what they're called bottle, a neck vessel, or a treasure basket. And this one has a story. It was used by rattlesnake shaman doctors who traveled around performing an annual dance in the spring for each village. And if you paid him to take part, you were guaranteed you wouldn't be bitten by a rattlesnake.
Or your money back.
The rattlesnakes, the people just, even though rattlesnakes are pretty common in California, they would not kill rattlesnakes, at least the Yokuts people, because the rattlesnake was involved in their mythology. If the rattlesnake was the one who took your spirit to the afterworld, and you didn't want to offend that person, okay? So they would go out and sing in the spring. They would go to their favorite rattlesnake collecting areas, sing and play a flute, which snakes don't have ears, so I don't know how that worked, but get to come out and then put him in here. What I don't know is how they kept the snake in there. I mean, I don't know if you ever tried to put a snake in a bag. You know, I mean, it's like, get back in there. So I've never seen a lid for this thing, but they would be eagle feathers, down feathers put in there, so maybe they liked it. I know when I would, as an arborist, sometimes they would, before the bulldozers came in, they'd say, oh, I want you to make a recording of all the trees in here, and then we're going to cut them all down, and then we'll tax the developer to pay for the trees. So I'd be like walking around, you know, recording stuff, and then I'd see these poor lizards or snakes, and I go, oh, you're going to get bulldozed. I remember I had a bucket and a survey stake, and I was trying to catch this big rattlesnake in Folsom, and it didn't want to be caught. You know, so I tried to pin it down, and then try to grab its head, and then, you know, and after a while, the snake was so defensive, I go, I'm going to get bit and really feel stupid. But that one is really cool, and I just want to read one little passage from Lada's book about that basket, because it's really, really cool. In the Yokuts religion, the rattlesnake was the private secretary or winnatoon of Tehipipit, something like that, keeper of the hereafter. He was more than that. He was a combination of a winnatoon and an FBI operator. It was his business to call around and spy on the Yokuts. When he found a bad Yokuts, he sent his name to Tehipipinits, who immediately called in this bad Yokuts. The above is best illustrated in the Yokut story of the visit to the dead people's land. When the husband of the dead wife returned to this world, he violated the order to keep secret of what he had seen. As soon as he disobeyed the orders, he was struck dead by a rattlesnake. A folklore story concerning the designs of a typical Yokut's bottleneck basket used by medicine men to nest rattlesnakes relates to the fatal power of the rattlesnake. On some of these baskets appear the pattern of the diamondback rattlesnake, as well as designs representing ants and water skaters. The idea is there was a bad rattlesnake, and the water striders heard that it was sending people to their demise too early, so they swam across the river and got the ant people to come and sting the bad rattlesnake to death. So if you look there, there's a water strider, although technically they should have 6 legs. but that's supposedly the water strider pattern, reminding the snake to behave itself. Now, I always wondered, if you bought your rattlesnake insurance and then you were bitten, did you get to go take revenge on the shaman or not? Anyway, kind of a fun book. I want to show a couple things up here. I loved making string. It's like a mindless kind of an activity. But I made a bunch of
Rattles.
well, these are deer. Well, actually, I ran over one of these deer, but get the toenails off roadkill deer. You could use goat hooves or something. And this was a musical instrument, and also used by folks. This is from Central California, the model that I used, and it's like, you know, Christmas jingle bells. They also made rattles out of. This was a little. I guess that's willow. Yeah, willow with acorns. And some of the things I've been saving for a long time, but I don't have enough for a rattle, are we have native silk moths. You know that here in California? We have silk moths. And they make these beautiful cocoons by eating ceanothus leaves. And they're a luna moth. They're beautiful, not a luna moth, Cecropia moth. Big orange spots on it. And anyway, the Indian people collected the cocoons, pulled out the worm inside, and then put pebbles in it, and then sealed up the opening, and then tied those on string into a rattle like that. So, and they also made poor turtle shells into a rattle with pebbles inside. So music was a big part of people's lives. Let's see. For those who want another kind of brush, Craig Bates, who's a curator, married to a Miwok lady, basket weaver. He's a curator up at the Indian Museum at Yosemite, and he became such an accomplished weaver and craftsman. But this was a deer skin, which is, have you ever done any tanning? Other than, you know, in the beauty parlor. The best tanning elements other than tan oak would be the brain, the gray matter of mammals. And one mouse brain is big enough to tan one mouse skin. And the same with the deer. So this is buckskin that's been brain cured to make a pine needle brush. Very cool thing. Also from the deer, I wanted to show you how do you weave the baskets. Okay, oil baskets, like this one I'm working on right here. I did have a piece of willow, but it kept snapping and it was pissing me off. I mean, it was like, and I didn't want to travel with it. I knew I'd break it and get angry at myself, so I'm using a reed for this part of it. You know, when I studied with Mabel McKay, she would just take an old tapestry needle. In the old days, and I tried it for a while, but not too successfully, they made their needles or awls out of deer bones, and both the kind of a tibia bone here. I think I had a real long one. Where's my tibia? Oh, here we go. Ta-da! Can you see that? And just whittle it down, and then that's used to poke where you want to put the stitch. But a cool way too is making it out of the cannon bone, you know, because these animals walk on their tippy toes, their toenails. They're like the artiodactyls and the perissodactyls. They've combined these bones into a very special strong bone. You know, the metacarpals and metatarsals are not separate like in our hands and feet. So this cannon bone became a more common source for these awls for doing the sewing. And you start scraping with a sharp rock down the middle and split them in two and then whittle at them. So all these things take a lot of time. You know, that's why they didn't watch a lot of television. Anyway, wonderful things. But I don't know, this one it seemed like every few hours it would break, and I was constantly having to resharpen it, whereas my needle, my steel needle didn't do that. Apparently some of the early basket weavers who did contact white people would trade, they liked umbrellas. the spokes from the umbrella because it can be made into a basketry awl. So anyway, I've got a few good books up here. I've got a pretty extensive library, and it's hard to figure out which book to bring. But here's that one by Peg Wheat on survival arts of the primitive Paiute, really good. And Ted gave me this one. It's Survival Skills of Native California. It's an awesome book. I don't know how this guy learned all those things, but it's a lot of how-to things. You know, how to get the brain out of a dead deer or something. But it's fun. You know, how many of us would, as Ted said, how many of us would survive on our own? And we were having a discussion about Ishi. Ted's wife didn't know much about the last Yahi Indian who lived southwest of Lassen in Deer Creek, and his people were never very numerous. They apparently had some kind of a reproductive problems, and they were known to steal children, especially young girls, from their neighbors to get, you know, keep their numbers up. So they weren't looked upon very well. Anyway, with the gold rush and the European and other folks intruding into their territory, they were pushed further and further back, and then they had to resort to eating cattle and horses, and that brought down the wrath of the white people on them, and they were pretty much slaughtered in a couple of caves. And a few people survived, including Ishi, maybe a woman cousin, and his aunt and uncle. And they had to hide out. They just were so afraid of the outsiders, and they disguised their home. What a terrible way to live. And then some surveyors came across them in the wintertime, and Ishi tried to decoy them while his elders swam the river, and he never drowned. And then his sister, I forget what happened, or his cousin, whom he couldn't marry. Anyway, another surveying group came upon his camp while he was away. He had to hide, and they said, wow, look at these cool things. You got bows and arrows and baskets, and they took all of his belongings. And without the products of hundreds of hours of work and skill and the right season to collect, he started starving to death, and he wandered into, I think it was Oroville, and the sheriff put him in the jail. They didn't know what else to do with him, and he didn't speak any known language. He was totally, it was a foreign situation, and the sheriff sent down to the University of California, and a very wonderful anthropologist came up and met him and brought a list of words from extinct people's languages, and Ishi recognized a couple of words, and then they got into it. Anyway, he ended up being adopted by all these anthropologists and lived quite well at the museum in San Francisco. And he would demonstrate flint knapping and arrowhead making. And he was there was a guy named Saxton T. Pope who was his medical doctor. And Pope was also an avid archer. And so he was curious. He got Ishi to show him how to make bows, arrows, and quivers from A to B all the way in. And he found out that he wasn't that good a marksman, that the bows he made weren't that accurate for more than, 100 feet. But the man knew quail, he could speak rabbit, he could speak bobcat, and he knew how to call the animals in and approach them very, very carefully. And of course, most of the native peoples would take sweat baths every day to purify themselves. So they probably weren't very stinky, odoriferous. And people would also, got to have permission from the animal spirit before they could hunt it. I mean, it's a lot of wonderful cultural things that went on. But unfortunately, Ishi did contract tuberculosis and passed away after a couple of years. But he really brought back to our knowledge a lot of wonderful things. And Pope was he said, that Ishi was one of the finest human beings he'd ever met. Just a remarkable tribute. A couple of other goodies I got here. These are called astragalus bones. They're the ankle bones of a deer, but you can also get them from sheep and goats. And they have a convex side and a concave side, and they would also use these for gaming. And what I like, my friend Bruce Smizer made me some wild walnut gaming dice. They're kind of based on Shumesh or Southern California gambling dice, where they were filled with asphaltum, We have natural oil seepages everywhere along the central and southern California, and then bits of abalone shell. And again, kind of fun things. I like, we used to run some youth camps and things. We do a lot of little Indian games. People like to gamble, period, I think. Any questions about some of this stuff? Yes?
Actually, I have a question about cooking.
Okay.
Okay. So sometimes I go to events and we get on the subject of edible native plants, and so sometimes people ask me what the Native Americans used to use, like spices and things like that. I always think this is
Well, I mentioned the bay tree.
okay.
That the bay nuts are kind of spicy, so a
Peppery.
few of those, yeah, they're peppery. They're called pepper nuts. At least in this area where acorns mush was a staple, that the cooked up ground pepper nuts were also added in there as a condiment to eat. And then salts could be extracted from both collecting salt from tide pools or from mining salt, and certain plants like the, I'm trying to think, what's the, that
Cow parsnip.
composite, the colt's foot.
And cow parsnip too.
And cow parsnip, the leaves were often rolled up and parched and turned to ash, and then that was kind of salty tasting.
So essentially salt and pepper.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't really recall any particular thing used as a spice. I mean, people would kill themselves to go all the way around the world in the 13, 14, 1500s to look for spice.
Yeah.
I was just reading a book that talked about some of the early navigators at the Spice Islands in Indonesia, that you can smell them miles away from at sea, with the winds blowing. Yeah, we can. If somebody wants to take a chance of making maybe it. We have hot water during the break. We can try making a little cider. Well, I mean boiling water.
Yes.
Now, who's going to make the fire?
So I
In cooking rocks, you got to get rocks that aren't going to explode when you get them hot.
I put this electrical cord into the fire.
Okay.
So where's the pot?
Oh, we were going to use
To put
a.
the hot water in.
How about this thing?
Okay.
And we have filters. I'm not very well organized this, but anyway, I did collect the manzanita berries, so that was something. But I've got a really beautiful big mortar, but I didn't want to lug it down here. So I brought this one. This is actually a metate in mono. I think the metate I bought from an antique store. It was up near Pyramid Lake somewhere.
Where did you get the berries?
Oh, I live in this El Dorado County at about 3,000 feet, and these are on a south-facing slope, and they're the Arctostaphylos glauca, the white-leaf manzanita. It's a tall one, kind of a fire type, beautiful, doesn't make burls. And
Big berry.
yeah, it's not the big berry manzanita, but they're,
Patulus?
all of the, yeah.
Patulus?
No, patulus is a green leaf. This is glauca.
This is the one that shows up in your headlights.
Yeah. Oh, they're so beautiful after a rain. Kind of like the underside of madrone leaves after a rain, are silvery looking. Anyway, all the manzanitas, as far as I know, will work. Of course, one of the most widespread manzanitas is ground cover, uva ursi, you may have in your own garden. And that Arctostaphylos means bear, square bears, in Latin and Greek.
Bear's food.
Yeah. So you don't have to filter out the seeds. You just grind it up, and it's got this powdery meal. And let's see.
A coffee filter.
Yeah. Well, we could use pine needles. We're just ad-libbing here.
Did the natives ferment any of this stuff?
Drink beer?
Alcohol was made in the New World, but not so much in the northwestern America. And I think a lot of people were genetically sort of allergic to alcohol. Probably most of us are, We just don't admit it. Yeah.
Question, we talked about the fact that the California native people did not really have a lot of tribal warfare, except...
Well, it was ritualized.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, from what I've read, and again, I'm not an expert at all in things, that sometimes there was mostly feuds. You know, somebody gets sick and they think, oh, that person hired a shaman to poison me, or, you know, and then you maybe ambush that person. But warfare was usually very ritualized. Everybody would stand up in lines facing each other and taunting, and then somebody would get hurt and the game was over. You know, and the person that was injured had to receive compensation from the winning tribe. Of course, if they didn't get enough, you know.
I know that the Pit and the Ajumawe and the Modoc and the Klamath, they were pretty aggressive.
Oh yeah, and the Chimawave had warrior classes.
Do you think that...
But I'm thinking, mostly what I'm thinking of is Central California.
I'm just wondering if there's a botanical reason for that. Was the lack of food an issue that
Could
caused...
be.
I mean,
But who was recording that they were violent? You know, I mean, when I drive around, you know, you see these historical monuments, and if the native people killed more soldiers than the soldiers killed the native people, it was a massacre.
Yeah.
You know, and if everybody in the village was, you know, exterminated, then it was a victory. It all depends on your point of view.
I suppose.
You know, and in California, when Europeans started coming here in the 17 and 1800s, they brought a lot of diseases in, and malaria was extremely virulent in the early 1800s and wiped out 20, 30,000 people, maybe 80, 90% of the population of the Central Valley was just gone.
Smallpox, measles.
And then all the other things, that diseases and, you know, losing your way of life. And then there's a lot of treachery too. It's you know, like Sutter, when Sutter was up in Coloma, and I lived in Coloma area and on the American River, and I was always fascinated that Marshall situated his sawmill there, and they talked about white pines or sugar pines there, and I've never seen them, and I'm wondering if there was a relic population from the last glacial age that survived at 1,000 feet or whatever. We have them in, there's some sugar pines in Placerville at 2,000 feet. They're kind of depauperate looking. But anyway, Sutter, who wasn't a very nice man, he kept a lot of slaves and concubines down in Sutter's fort, forced labor. He signed a deal with the people in Coloma that for a few beads and blankets, they gave up his territory. Then he said, well, I bought this land from the Indians, and I'm claiming 1/5 of all the gold that you guys dig up here. And that worked for about a year, and then people go like, the heck with you, you Swede, or, you know.
No, he was a Swiss.
Yeah, oh, he was Swiss, yeah. One of the cool things is he bought Fort Ross from the Russians. The pocket gophers didn't allow the Russians to thrive and grow potatoes. They wanted to grow produce to bring up to New Archangel, you know, Sitka and that area. But I've got some friends who are Tlinkets that I visit up in Juneau, people who teach that language, and they're both poets. And some of the stories that you read about, now those were very warlike people. They almost kicked the Russians' butts out of there. But I was reading one case when the United States purchased from Russia Alaska, that they didn't know how to administer it, and they ended up giving the Army jurisdiction. Well, there have been a couple of prospectors who had been abusing some Native women, and there was retribution, and a couple of whites got killed. And so the Navy came in and bombarded, with the Army and Navy, they bombarded this village. And in retribution, these people, a group of those folks, paddled all the way to Seattle. And the guy who was sort of one of the administrators who got transferred to Seattle, they came there and cut his head off on his porch, and then paddled all the way back up the coast. You know, I mean, you know, they are true warriors. In fact, you know, the northwest coast had very complicated societies, but some of them had slaves that were considered property. And if you wanted to show how rich you were, you'd sacrifice a slave. And there's a real interesting story about travels in Alaska that John Muir wrote. He was traveling with Presbyterian ministers, Reverend Young, and even though they were Tlingit people, they're from, down on the Wrangell area, and they were kind of enemies with these folks who were up in the Chilkat area. And so they were given safe passage, maybe. But anyway, the Chilkat people really liked John Muir. He was such a good orator. And they were curious about Jesus and what kind of things can your gods give us? And but they liked Muir because they asked him, "Do you think wolves have souls?" And he went, "Of course they do." And hey, we want him for a teacher. But anyway, I lost my train of thought on that one. Oh, I was talking about revenge, but never mind. That's okay. Plants.
I just wondered if the baskets were ever mended or if they would not be structured.
Oh yeah, they'd be woven and repaired. Especially now men wove heavy-duty burden baskets and fish traps. They also made traps that they would put over the trunks of trees, woodpecker nests, and then in the morning they'd whoop the tree trunk with a branch, and the startled bird would fly out into this long, skinny trap, and that's how they got the feathers for the baskets. But they would be repaired. And a couple of my favorite baskets are watertight. They're covered with melted charcoal. And I've repaired some of those by getting pine pitch and melting, and it works pretty well. And there are, these things are just priceless in museums, and they're wonderful, skilled conservators in the collections that can repair things pretty well. When I worked at Audubon Canyon Ranch, it's a heron and egret sanctuary in Marin County, we built a nice museum, and one guy on our board who was good at raising money, amongst other things, was a big muck-a-muck with the DeYoung Museum, and we wanted to present both the house in the Audubon Canyon on Indian Middens, because it's this nice place to live. Everybody went there, oh yeah, it's a nice place. Well, I've been living here for hundreds of years. And anyway, so Stan Pitcher got the DeYoung Museum to loan us some Indian baskets that were just gorgeous. And we put them in these cases. Well, years after I had left there, we just cut some pepperwood tree trunks in sections and used those as little stands. They had bark. They looked really, unbeknownst to us, there were boring beetles got in there. And they went, ooh, what's this sitting on my pepperwood meal? So I ended up eating and damaging these priceless baskets. I felt so badly. I'm glad I wasn't there to have to apologize. But you can, if you have old baskets, you can give them a little steam bath and wipe them down gently with warm water and let them dry out.
But if the fibers were if you let your hot stone sit a little too long.
Yeah, well then I think Grandma's got to, teach you how to do it. Yeah, I mean, I know on this particular one, the 3-stick basket, this is watertight if I soak it and the fibers expand. It'd take me 6-7 hours to go part way around with splitting the threads and getting them all nice and even. You learn how to keep a knife kind of sharp. When I quit working at the Audubon Canyon, the docents gave me this beautiful basket. It's a single rod basket by a Wintun woman, and they're neighbors of the Pomo, and they intermarried quite a bit. And it's a single rod basket, but and again, sedge root.
What's this single rod?
Okay, I'm making a single. Okay. Coil basketry is basically putting together 2 spirals, but in 180-degree planes. So instead of having, this is a single rod basket, the foundation is a coil of 1 stick, okay? For a 3-stick basket, which are the watertight ones, at least made by the Pomo, they put 2 sticks with a third on top and then go around and then coil over, and they would put 3 sticks like this, older upper one, and then with your awl, you got to find that opening between the stitches on the previous row and go in there between these and pull it out real quick and stick that sharpened end of your thread through there before it closes up. But also, it interlocks all of these things together. And then when it's soaked, the fibers expand and it'll be watertight. And, you know, every different culture would have people who excelled, you know, just like some people are great with computers or, you know, or gardening. You know, every society has its artists. And so people that would also own their patterns for basketry, and they'd use them for trade items. It's interesting that redbud is used quite a bit on the east side of the Sierra Nevada as a coloring element in the weaving patterns, and yet it doesn't occur on the east side of our Sierra Nevada. So it was traded. And you know, if you had a valuable clump of redbud, I don't know what it is. Oh, here it is. And they like to put cloth around them. So that's, you know, you could carry a lot of those in your burden basket. And you might want to meet somebody up at the top of the Sierra Crest, and they'd bring obsidian and pine nuts, or, you know, dried fish or something that was really good. Something worthwhile. You know, and traders of all cultures are pretty interesting people. And other people that would travel around might be storytellers that, you know, could make their living. But
Probably walking newspapers.
oh yeah, yeah,
All the gossip.
yeah. I mean, there's a. I think Heiser wrote some interesting books on our articles on the trade routes in California that, again, later on developed into our state highway system.
Then there's the Silk Road.
The Silk Road, yeah. Yeah, I've just been, the last week I've been fascinated reading a new book about Chinese exploration of the world in 1420s. It was just amazing. But then all their records were burned at the end of the Ming Dynasty. It's just mind-boggling that they created charts that Columbus used. It's, you know, 70 years before. Yeah, there's Australia and there's a new world. And, you know, fascinating. A good read, 1421.
So are there some books here on the table that you would like to point out?
Well, there's for the cheapie, the University of California Press puts out some lovely ones, Edible and Useful Plants of California. There's also one by E.K. Balls. Great name. Very good. It's one of the first in their series. And, you know, it used to get $3 and fit in your pocket, and now the price has gone up, and the books are larger, so you put it in your backpack. But I really like this early use of California plants. Heyday Books, Heyday Press in Berkeley. Malcolm Margolin, a wonderful publisher, has written many, many books. This is one of the best, The Ohlone Way. That's kind of a generic name for all the peoples who live right around the Bay Area. And I love the illustrations. And I always, I think Malcolm Margolin. And
He wrote it?
yeah, he wrote it. He's
And he's self-published.
yeah, he's wonderful. He has so many interesting things. And he came to one of my classes years ago, and we've kind of.
He's going to be running the poetry night at the conference.
Oh wow! Okay. Another reason to come. He puts out there's a book on California Indians. That's what's going on now. There's also a California Indian Basket Weavers Association, and even if you're not a weaver or a Native American, you can join as a non-voting member, and they have a yearly gathering. And one of my friends was she's Caucasian, but she was the head of it for a while. And anyway, it's a fun thing that this cultural knowledge is still going on, being passed on. But getting access to the plant materials is really tough. For instance, the sedge rhizomes, you have to have a flooding river to replenish the sandbanks in which this rhizome growing sedge. You know, they're either runners or clumpers, kind of like bamboo. You know, if you don't have, oh, go ahead. If you don't have floods, you're not going to hit that kind of habitat. And then also getting permission to get there and dig it. A lot of the basket weavers, a lot of the different nations of Indian peoples have agreements with the Forest Service and BLM, and sometimes even the National Park System, to have access to their weaving materials. And I think it's really cool. And they've even done controlled burns, just hopefully controlled, to encourage some of the plants to regenerate weavable materials. So, you know, some things are looking up.
Thank you, John.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Some ciders that anybody wants to go.
Oh, you want to try some?